What if the man who saved the world on screen once couldn't even save himself? What if the same person who stood at the center of one of the biggest film franchises in history had once been rejected, abandoned, and locked behind bars? This isn't fiction. This isn't a script written for dramatic effect. This is the real-life story of Robert Downey Jr., a man who went from prison cells to global superstardom, from addiction to inspiration, from being written off completely to becoming Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr.'s story doesn't begin with struggle. It begins with privilege wrapped in chaos. Born into a family deeply embedded in Hollywood, his father, Robert Downey Sr., was a creative force in underground cinema, while his mother, Elsie Ann Ford, nurtured artistic expression. On the surface, it looked like the perfect environment for a future star, but beneath that surface was a dangerous reality. At the age of just 6, Downey was introduced to drugs by his own father. It wasn't framed as something harmful, it was casual, almost normalized. And in that moment, long before fame ever arrived, the seeds of addiction were planted. As he grew older, it became clear that Downey wasn't just talented, he was extraordinary. In the 1980s and early 1990s, he quickly established himself as one of Hollywood's most promising actors. His charisma was effortless, his performances magnetic. He had the rare ability to disappear into a role while still commanding the audience's attention. Films like Less Than Zero eerily mirrored his own life, portraying characters battling addiction, except Downey wasn't acting anymore, he was living it. Then came the role that should have defined his legacy forever, Chaplin. His portrayal of Charlie Chaplin was nothing short of brilliant. Critics were stunned, audiences were captivated, and Hollywood rewarded him with an Academy Award nomination. At that moment, Robert Downey Jr. stood at the peak of his career. He had everything: talent, recognition, and limitless potential. But success didn't save him. Instead, it accelerated his descent. Behind the applause and flashing cameras, Downey's addiction was tightening its grip. What started as experimentation had become dependency. By the mid-1990s, his life had spiraled into chaos. Arrests became frequent, rehab stints came and went. Each attempt at recovery was followed by relapse. It was a cycle that seemed impossible to break. One of the most shocking moments came when he was found sleeping in a stranger's home while under the influence. It wasn't just reckless, it was alarming. The industry that once celebrated him began to distance itself. Directors hesitated, studios refused to insure him. He was no longer seen as a talented actor, he was seen as a liability. And in Hollywood, that label can end everything. By 1999, the consequences caught up with him. After repeatedly violating probation, Downey was sentenced to prison. This wasn't a movie set or a controlled environment. This was real life, real consequences. For a man who had once walked red carpets and received standing ovations, the fall was devastating. Prison has a way of stripping everything away. There are no distractions, no applause, no escape, just silence and your own thoughts. For Downey, this was the lowest point of his life. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just brutally real. But sometimes it's at rock bottom where transformation begins. There wasn't a single moment where everything suddenly changed, no instant realization, no dramatic turning point. Instead, it was something quieter, a slow, painful awareness that if he didn't change, there would be nothing left, no career, no relationships, no future. After his release, the road ahead was anything but smooth. Recovery isn't a straight line, and for Downey, it was filled with setbacks. He relapsed again and again. Each time it seemed like proof to the world that he couldn't change, that this was who he was. But something had shifted deep inside him, because even after falling, he kept getting back up, and that persistence began to matter. A major turning point in his life came through his relationship with Susan Downey. She brought stability, honesty, and a sense of accountability that he had never truly experienced before. She didn't try to fix him, she set boundaries, clear ones. If he wanted a future with her, he had to stay sober, no exceptions. That kind of clarity changed everything. Gradually, Downey began rebuilding his life, not with big, dramatic moves, but with small, consistent steps. He returned to acting cautiously, taking roles that allowed him to prove something he hadn't been able to show for years: reliability. He wasn't just talented, he could be trusted. He even landed a role in the television series Ally McBeal, where his performance earned him a Golden Globe. It was a glimpse of redemption, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he could come back. But then came another relapse, another setback, another moment where it seemed like everything would collapse again. For most people, that would have been the end, but Downey refused to let it be. Because by this point, he understood something most people don't. Redemption isn't about never falling, it's about refusing to stay down. And then came the opportunity that would change everything. In the mid-2000s, Marvel Studios was preparing to take a huge risk. They were developing a film based on a relatively unknown comic book character, Iron Man. At the time, Marvel wasn't the powerhouse it is today. This wasn't a guaranteed success. In fact, it was a gamble. They needed someone to play Tony Stark, a genius billionaire with a complicated past, sharp wit, and a journey towards redemption. Most studios wanted a safe choice, but director Favreau saw something different. He didn't want safe, he wanted real. And to him, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just an option, he was the only choice. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Both Downey and Tony were brilliant, both were flawed, both had faced self-destruction and needed redemption. It wasn't just casting, it was storytelling at its most authentic level. But convincing the studio wasn't easy. Downey's past still followed him: insurance risks, reputation concerns, fear of failure. Many executives strongly opposed the idea. Favreau fought for him because he believed that sometimes the greatest risk leads to the greatest reward. In 2008, Iron Man was released, and everything changed. From the very first scene, it was clear this wasn't just another superhero movie. Downey didn't feel like he was playing Tony Stark. He felt like he was Tony Stark. The confidence, the humor, the vulnerability, it all felt real because it was. Audiences connected with it instantly. The film was a massive success, but more importantly, it launched something bigger than anyone expected: the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What followed was unprecedented. Film after film, the universe expanded, characters were introduced, stories intertwined, and at the center of it all was Robert Downey Jr. He didn't just lead the franchise, he defined it. Over the years, Downey became one of the highest paid actors in the world, but his success wasn't just measured in money or fame, it was measured in something far more powerful: impact. Because his story wasn't just about entertainment, it was about hope. And then came the moment that brought everything full circle: Avengers Endgame. I am Iron Man. Those 4 words carried more weight than any line in cinematic history, because they weren't just spoken by a character, they were lived by the man behind it. A man who had lost everything, a man who was counted out, a man who refused to give up. Today, Robert Downey Jr. stands as more than just an actor. He is a symbol of resilience, a reminder that your past does not define your future, that failure is not the end of your story, that no matter how far you fall, you can still rise again. His journey wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, but that's exactly why it matters, because real redemption isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. And if there's one thing his story proves, it's this: it's never too late to rewrite your life. If this story inspired you, don't stop here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life stories that remind you what's possible even when everything feels impossible. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of Robert Downey Jr.'s journey impacted you the most. And remember, your story isn't over yet.